Chulainn, the Irish hero cursed by his own rage. In the heart of the mist-shrouded hills of ancient Ireland, where the line between the mortal world and the otherworld is as thin as a whisper, legends are born. These are not mere tales spun to pass the long dark nights. They are echoes of an age of heroes, of gods walking among men, and of destinies forged in the fires of glory and sorrow. Among these epic sagas, one name rings out with the force of a thunderclap, a name synonymous with unparalleled bravery, fearsome power, and a tragedy so profound it has been etched into the very soul of the Emerald Isle. This is the story of Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster. But this is not a simple tale of heroism. It is a chronicle of a gift that was also a curse, of a power so immense it could protect a kingdom, yet so uncontrollable it would ultimately devour the man who wielded it. This is the story of a hero whose greatest strength was also his most destructive flaw. His rage. A rage that warped him, drove him, and ultimately a rage that led to his ruin. Welcome, seekers of lore and legend, to the Eldritch Codex. Today we journey back to the age of myth to uncover the life of Ireland's greatest warrior, to witness his monumental deeds, and to understand the terrible price of his glory. This is Chulainn Explained, the hero whose rage was a destructive curse. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but with a mystery, with a disappearance that blurred the lines between the court of kings and the realm of the divine. At the royal court of Emain Machu, the seat of power for King Conchobar mac Nessa of Ulster, lived his sister, the noblewoman Deichtin. One day, as she and her 50 handmaidens were present at court, a flock of magical birds descended upon the plains outside. They were beautiful, otherworldly creatures, and they began to feast upon the grasses of Ulster, consuming everything down to the bare soil. The men of Ulster were enraged by this strange plague. They yoked 9 chariots and set out to hunt the birds, with King Conchobar himself and his trusted warrior Fergus MacRoich leading the chase. Deichtin, an accomplished charioteer in her own right, insisted on joining them. They pursued the flock all day, across the length and breadth of the land, but the birds were always just out of reach, their magical nature defying the hunter's skill. As dusk fell, a heavy snow began to fall, blanketing the landscape and forcing the hunting party to seek shelter. They came upon a single isolated house, modest but welcoming. A man and his wife greeted them warmly, offering them food, drink, and respite from the blizzard. That night, as the storm raged outside, the wife of their host went into labor. Deichtin, a woman of noble compassion, left her own bed to assist, and by morning, the woman had given birth to a healthy baby boy. At the same time, out in the stables, one of King Conchobar's prized mares gave birth to twin foals. It was a night of strange and portentous births under a stranger's roof. When dawn broke, the snow had vanished. But so too had the house, the host, and his wife. All that remained on the empty plain was the newborn infant boy and the 2 foals. The hunting party, mystified, realized they had been guests in a phantom house, a dwelling of the otherworld. They had stumbled into the realm of the Ow's Sea, the people of the Mounds, the ancient gods of Ireland. Deichtin took the infant boy as her foster son and returned with him to Emain Machu. But a short time later, the child fell ill and died, plunging Deichtin into a deep grief. In her sorrow, she drank a cup of water, and as she did, a tiny shimmering creature, no bigger than a gnat, leaped from the cup into her mouth. That night she had a dream. A radiant figure appeared before her, a man of impossible beauty and light. He revealed himself to be Luf Lamfada, Luf of the Long Arm, the great sun god of the Tuatha De Danann. He told her that it was he who had been her host in the phantom house, that the child who had died was his own, and that now, he had planted his seed within her once more. She was to bear his son, and that son was to be named Setanta. Thus the child's lineage was sealed. He was of 2 worlds, the son of a mortal princess of Ulster, and the son of a primordial god of light. This dual heritage, part mortal, part divine, set Setanta apart from his very first breath, marking him for a life of extraordinary and ultimately tragic destiny. He was raised in his mother's home on the plains of Muir-Themne, a land of rugged coasts and sweeping fields. But even as a toddler, it was clear he was unlike other children. The blood of the sun god flowed in his veins, and it filled him with a restless energy, a prodigious strength that seemed too vast for his small body to contain. He heard tales of Emain Machu, the heart of Ulster's power, where the sons of kings and champions trained together in the boy troop. He yearned to be there, to test his strength against theirs, to take his place among the future guardians of the kingdom. At the tender age of 5, his patience ran out. While other children were learning their first lessons, Setanta fashioned for himself a set of toy weapons: a small shield of woven sticks, a hurling stick of wood, and a silver ball. He announced to his mother that he was leaving for Emain Macha to join the boy troop. She laughed, telling him he was too young and needed a grown warrior to escort him and present him to the king. Setanta dismissed her concerns. "The way to Emain Macha is a well-trod path," he declared. "I can find it myself." And with a simple farewell, the 5-year-old boy set off alone on the long journey north. He traveled for days, amusing himself by striking his silver ball far ahead of him, then running so fast he could catch it before it hit the ground. When he finally arrived at the great fortress of Emain Macha, he saw a sight that filled him with excitement. On the playing fields before the ramparts were the 150 members of the boy troop, engaged in a fierce game of hurling. In the custom of the time, a newcomer was expected to place himself under the protection of one of the boys before joining their games. Setanta, knowing nothing of this custom and seeing only a challenge, saw no need for such formalities. He strode onto the field and single-handedly drove the ball through the throng of players, scoring a goal. The boy troop was stunned, then enraged by this stranger's arrogance. They took it as a grave insult. All 150 of them turned on the small boy, casting their hurling sticks and balls at him in a furious volley. Setanta, with the preternatural reflexes of his divine heritage, deflected every single projectile with his toy shield and stick. Then, his own temper flaring, he attacked. The sagas say a change came over him, a flicker of the battle frenzy that would later define him. He tore through the boy troop, knocking them down one by one, until all 150 of them were laid out on the grass, defeated and subdued. King Conchobar himself had been observing the commotion from the fortress walls, playing a game of fitchel or Irish chess with Fergus MacRoich. He was astounded by the little boy's prowess and fury. He descended to the field and demanded to know who this child was who could single-handedly best the entire youth corps of Ulster. It was then that Setanta was brought before the king, who recognized him as his own nephew. Conchobar calmed the boy troop, explained the misunderstanding, and formally welcomed Setanta into their ranks, placing them under the boy's protection as much as he was under theirs. From that day on, Setanta became their undisputed leader. But the act that would cast off the name Setanta forever, the deed that would forge his true identity, came shortly after, when he was just 7 years old. King Conchobar was invited to a great feast at the fortress of a man named Chulainn, the master smith of Ulster. A smith in the heroic age was a figure of immense importance and respect, his skills essential for forging the weapons of kings and champions. Conchobar, impressed with his young nephew's continuing feats, invited Setanta to join him. Setanta, however, was in the middle of a hurling match, single-handedly playing against the entire boy troop and winning. "I will follow you when our game is done," he called out to the king. Conchobar agreed and departed for the feast. When the king and his retinue arrived at Chulainn's fortress, the smith welcomed them warmly. "Will any other of your party be following you, my king?" Chulainn asked. Conchobar, having forgotten about his nephew in the excitement of the journey, replied that no one else was expected. With his guests safely inside, Chulainn declared, "Then I shall unleash my hound to guard my home and my herds." He is a beast of incredible ferocity, with the strength and temper of 100 men. Once he is loose, no one may approach this fortress until morning. And so the great hound of Chulainn was unchained. It was a monstrous creature, a legendary beast known throughout the land for its savagery, its primary duty to protect the smith's property from any and all intruders. Meanwhile, back at Emain Machu, Setanta finished his game. True to his word, he set off on the road to Chulainn's fortress, following the tracks of the king's chariot. He was unarmed, carrying only his hurling stick and his silver ball, which he played with as he walked. As he approached the smith's home, the massive hound sensed his presence. With a roar that shook the very ground, the beast charged, its eyes burning with fury, its jaws wide enough to swallow a child's head. The men feasting inside heard the terrible baying of the hound and froze. They remembered the boy. A great misfortune! King Concobar cried, realizing his fatal error. They were certain the boy was already dead. But outside, Setanta acted with lightning speed. As the monster lunged, he threw his silver ball with all his might. The ball shot like a stone from a sling directly into the hound's open mouth and down its throat, shattering its insides. Not finished, Setanta grabbed the beast by its hind legs and swung it around, smashing its head against the nearest standing stone until it was lifeless. The men of Ulster, led by a distraught Chulainn, rushed outside to find a shocking sight. The small boy, completely unharmed, standing over the corpse of the most feared hound in the kingdom. Chulainn was overcome with a mixture of relief for the boy and profound grief for his slain guardian. "My welcome is soured," the smith lamented. "My life is now a life without substance, my craft a craft without protection, now that my great dog, the guardian of my family and my livelihood, is gone." Seeing the smith's genuine sorrow, the young Setanta was filled not with pride at his kill, but with a deep and noble sense of honor. He stepped forward and made a solemn vow. "There is no great cause for anger," he said to Chulainn. "I myself will be your hound. I will guard your flocks, your fortress, and your family. I will be the protector of the plains of Muirthemne, and my protection will be over all of Ulster. This I swear, until a pup of the same stock as this great hound can be raised and trained to take its place." The assembled warriors were moved by his maturity and sense of responsibility. Cathbad, the chief druid of Ulster and Setanta's own grandfather, stepped forward and proclaimed, "From this day forward, your name shall be Chulainn, Hound of Chulainn." And Setanta, now Chulainn, accepted this new identity, a name earned in an act of both violence and profound duty. A fitting start for a hero whose life would be a constant struggle between his destructive power and his unwavering sense of honor. This new identity was soon sealed by a conscious act of embracing his own fate. Not long after, Cathbad the Druid was teaching his pupils and made a prophecy. He declared that any warrior who took up arms for the first time on that specific day would have his name live forever. His deeds would be praised above all other heroes in Ireland for all time. But, the Druid warned, his life would be fleeting and painfully short. Overhearing this, the 7-year-old Chulainn immediately ran from his games. He went straight to King Concobar, stood before the throne, and formally demanded to be given his arms. The king, surprised by the boy's sudden and serious request, granted it. He gave Chulainn a set of spears and a shield. Chulainn tested them, and with his divine strength shattered them to pieces. He broke 17 full sets of arms, the weapons of the king's household guard, as they were not strong enough to withstand his power. Finally, King Concobar gave him his own personal weapons, his shield, his spears, his sword. These alone held firm. Chulainn brandished the king's own weapons, accepting them as his own. He had heard the prophecy. He understood the price. A short life, but one of everlasting glory. It was a bargain Chulainn willingly, even eagerly, made. At the age of 7, the boy once known as Setanta had not only earned his legendary name, but had consciously chosen his own glorious and tragic destiny, setting his feet upon a path from which there could be no return. The Hound of Ulster was now ready for the world, and for the wars that awaited him. The boy who had killed the great hound was now growing into a man, and his legend was growing with him. At Emain Machu, Chulainn excelled at every feat, outshining not only the other youths but many of the veteran warriors of Ulster. His strength was becoming mythic, his speed was like a bolt of lightning, and his skill with weapons was second to none. But it was not only his prowess in arms that drew attention. He was growing into a man of startling, almost supernatural beauty. So handsome was Chulainn that a great anxiety began to stir among the men of Ulster. They gathered before King Concobar and voiced their concern. "King," they said, "this youth Chulainn will be the ruin of us all. His beauty is such that our wives and our daughters will not be able to resist him. They will cast aside their virtue for a single glance from him, and our households will be thrown into chaos. We must find a wife for him, and quickly, to occupy his heart and his passions, lest he claim all the women of Ulster for himself." King Concobar saw the wisdom in this. He agreed that a suitable match must be found for the kingdom's greatest champion. But Chulainn would not have just any woman. He was proud, and he declared that he would only marry a woman who was his equal in every way in nobility, in grace, in intelligence, and in spirit. His search led him, through reputation and rumor, to the fortress of Forgall Monach, known as Forgall the Cunning, a powerful chieftain in Leinster. Forgall had a daughter named Emer, whose fame was whispered throughout Ireland. Emer was said to possess the 6 gifts of womanhood: the gift of beauty, the gift of a beautiful voice, the gift of sweet speech, the gift of needlework, the gift of wisdom, and the gift of chastity. Chulainn traveled in his chariot to Forgall's fortress and found Emer playing with her handmaidens. They spoke in riddles, a battle of wits and veiled meanings, each testing the other's intelligence and character. By the end of their cryptic conversation, they were deeply impressed with one another. Chulainn declared that she was the only woman he would ever marry, and Emer agreed that she would have him, and no other. There was, however, one great obstacle: her father, Forgall the Cunning. Forgall vehemently opposed the match. While he recognized the power in the young Ulster warrior, he also saw that it was a wild, untamed power. Furthermore, he had already promised Emer's hand to another chieftain. He refused Chulainn outright, but seeing the determination in the young hero's eyes, Forgall devised a treacherous plan. He told Chulainn with feigned sincerity, "You are a mighty youth, it is true, but your name is not yet sung in the great halls of heroes. Your training is incomplete. If you wish to be worthy of my daughter, you must travel to the land of Alba, to the east across the sea, and seek out the warrior woman Scathack. She is the greatest teacher of arms in the world. Go and train under her. When you return as a fully fledged champion, renowned for your deeds, then you may have my daughter's hand." This was a deception. Forgall secretly believed the journey itself, or Scathack's notoriously brutal training regimen, would kill the young upstart. He sent word ahead, hoping that Chulainn would be turned away or slain before he ever reached his destination. He could not have been more wrong. For Chulainn, this was not an obstacle, but a challenge, a quest to prove his worthiness. He accepted without hesitation. The journey to Scathack's fortress, Duanscaith Fortress of Shadowsun, the Isle of Skye, was an epic trial in itself, a passage through a landscape of mythic dangers designed to filter out all but the most worthy heroes. Chulainn and his companions had to traverse the Plain of Ill Luck, a cursed marsh where mortal men's feet would become stuck fast, as if held by an unseen force. He had to navigate a treacherous glen filled with monstrous creatures that would devour any who faltered. Finally, after many trials that saw his companions turn back, he arrived alone at the final and most infamous obstacle, the Bridge of the Leaps. This was no ordinary bridge. It was a narrow, treacherous span that guarded the entrance to Scathack's domain. When a person set foot upon one end, the other end would violently rise up, throwing the hapless challenger back into the chasm below. 3 times Chulainn attempted to cross, and 3 times he was thrown back, bruised and frustrated. Finally, gathering all his strength and calling upon the supernatural agility gifted to him by his father Luff, he took a running start. Just as the bridge began to rise, he performed his heroic salmon leap, an incredible acrobatic feat, vaulting high into the air. He soared over the chasm and the bucking bridge, landing safely within the walls of the Fortress of Shadows. Scathach, the Shadowy One, was a warrior of immense power and mystique. She saw the young man who had overcome all obstacles to reach her, and she recognized the divine spark glinting in his eyes. She took him under her tutelage, and it was here that the forging of the hero truly began. She trained him in all the arts of war, pushing him past the limits of any mortal man. He learned incredible feats of agility, secret battle strategies, and devastating martial techniques known only to a select few. It was during this intense training that Chulainn met Ferdiad Mac Domain, a prince of the Fur Domnan from Connacht. Ferdiad was a warrior of immense skill and strength, Chulainn's equal in almost every way. They became fast friends, their rivalry in training blossoming into a deep and profound brotherhood. They were foster brothers, sharing their food, their quarters, their secrets and their loyalty. They swore sacred oaths to one another, promising eternal friendship and support. This bond, forged in the fires of Scathach's training ground, would one day become the source of Chulainn's greatest and most soul-crushing anguish. While Chulainn was in training, a war broke out between Scathach and her bitter rival, the warrior Queen Aif. Some tales say Aif was Scathach's own twin sister. Fearing for the life of her most promising pupil, Scathach gave Chulainn a powerful sleeping potion, one designed to keep an ordinary man unconscious for a full 24 hours, thus keeping him out of the battle. Such was Chulainn's superhuman constitution, however, that the potion only held him for a single hour. He awoke, furious at being left behind, and immediately rushed to join the fray. He learned that the war was to be decided by single combat between the champions of the 2 queens. Chulainn demanded to face Aif himself. Scathach warned him that Aif was the most formidable warrior she had ever known, but Chulainn was resolute. Before the fight, he asked Scathach what it was that Aif loved most in the world. Her chariot and her 2 horses, Scathach replied. Chulainn met Aif in combat, and the 2 were perfectly matched, a whirlwind of skill and fury. As the battle raged, with neither able to gain an advantage, Chulainn put his plan into action. He cried out in alarm, "Look! Your chariot and horses have fallen over the cliff." Aif, for a split second, instinctively turned her head to look. In that single moment of distraction, Chulainn lunged. He seized her, threw her to the ground, and held his blade to her throat. He spared her life, but only on 3 conditions. First, that she must end her hostility with Scathach forever. Second, that she must take him as a lover that night. And third, that she would bear him a son. Aif, defeated, had no choice but to agree. Before Chulainn finally left Alba to return to Ireland, his training complete, he left the pregnant Aif with a golden ring and a fateful set of instructions. "When our son is old enough that this ring fits his finger," he commanded, "you are to send him to Ireland to find me. You will give him this one charge. He must not turn aside for any man. He must not refuse a challenge from any man. And he must not, under any circumstances, reveal his name or identity to any man." This command, born of a warrior's pride and a desire to test his own heir, planted the seed of a future tragedy, one of the most painful in all of Irish myth. His training was now complete. He had mastered all the feats of arms. He had defeated the undefeatable Aif. As a final gift, a mark of her highest esteem, Scathach bestowed upon him a weapon she gave to no other student, the gíbalga, the barbed or belly spear. This was a weapon of dreadful and unique power, fashioned from the bone of a great sea monster. It was not meant to be thrown by hand, but to be cast with the foot from the water. Upon entering an enemy's body, it was said to erupt into 30 deadly barbs, tearing the victim apart from the inside and ensuring a gruesome, inescapable death. It was a weapon of last resort, a tool of absolute lethality. Chulainn returned to Ireland, his skills sharpened to a razor's edge, his reputation now preceding him. He was no longer the promising boy who had left. He was a fully fledged champion, a master warrior tamed and honed by the greatest teacher in the world. He went directly to the fortress of Forgal the Cunning to claim his bride. Forgal, seeing the hero he had hoped would die return in full glory, once again refused and barred his gates. But this was not the same boy Forgal had dismissed before. Chulainn laid siege to the fortress. He leaped over the ramparts, killed many of Forgal's men, and created chaos within the walls. Forgal himself, in a panic, tried to leap from the battlements to escape, but he fell and was killed. Chulainn seized Emer, along with her father's gold and silver, and fought his way clear of her vengeful kinsmen. He had won his bride. The forging was complete. The boy Setanta had become Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster. He had been trained by the master of all warriors, had bested legendary champions, and was now armed with a weapon of supernatural power. His potential had been honed into a razor-sharp reality. He was a weapon forged and tempered waiting for his war. And that war was not long in coming. Chulainn had returned to Ireland a champion. He was a hero forged in the crucible of mythic trials, trained by the world's greatest warrior, and armed with weapons of supernatural lethality. He possessed a loving wife, the respect of his king, and the adoration of his people. He was the ultimate protector, the shining shield of Ulster. But to truly understand the tragedies that would haunt his life, to grasp the profound sorrow that was inextricably woven into the fabric of his glory, we must now look deeper. We must look past the hero and behold the monster that coiled within him. This was a force far more elemental than the simple anger of a warrior in the heat of combat. It was a terrifying supernatural phenomenon, a grotesque and horrifying transformation known in the ancient tongue as the Ryastrad, the warp spasm. This was the dark inheritance of his divine blood, the devastating and inescapable price of his superhuman power. It was his greatest weapon, and his most destructive curse. When the Ryastrad seized him, Chulainn ceased to be human. He became a figure of pure, unreasoning, monstrous fury, an incarnation of war itself. The ancient texts, particularly the epic Tain Buachaillnge, do not shy away from the sheer horror of the metamorphosis. They describe it with chilling precision. His body made a furious twist inside his skin, so that his feet and shins and knees switched to the rear and his heels and calves switched to the front. Imagine the sight. A hero's powerful legs, suddenly contorted backwards, a grotesque parody of the human form. But the transformation did not stop there. The muscles of his neck swelled and bulged like the head of a giant, straining against his skin. One of his eyes would recede deep into his skull, until it was no wider than the eye of a needle, lost in a dark cavern of flesh. The other eye would swell and pop from its socket, hanging down his cheek, raw and bloodshot, as large and round as a warrior's wooden bowl. His mouth was stretched into a terrifying, inhuman grin. His lips pulled back from his teeth until they met his jawbone, revealing his gullet and throat. He would let out a roar like that of a lion, and from the very crown of his head, a column of dark, boiling blood would spout upwards, so high that it would form a magical, smoky mist above him, a dark rainbow of doom. And from his forehead, the long-lathe hero light would blaze forth, an incandescent, terrifying beacon of his internal, divine fire. In this state, Chulainn was an unstoppable engine of destruction. All sense of self, of loyalty, of friendship was obliterated, burned away by the sheer intensity of his rage. He knew neither friend nor foe, only the primal, insatiable urge to kill. His strength was magnified to a godly level. He could wade through armies as a man wades through reeds, building ramparts from the corpses of his enemies, his feet never touching the ground for the bodies piled beneath them. This battle frenzy was what made him the ultimate champion of Ulster, the force that could stand against impossible odds. But it was a double-edged sword of the cruelest kind. It was a power he could summon in moments of dire need, but once unleashed, it could never be truly controlled. The spasm had to run its violent course, and heaven help anyone who stood in its path. The first true demonstration of this terrifying potential came upon his celebrated return from the land of Alba. After completing his training with Scathack, he set sail for Ireland, his mind still alight with the fires of war and the thrill of his victories. As his boat neared the shores of Ulster, his warrior spirit, unchecked and untempered, began to surge. The people on the coast saw him coming, and word was sent to Emain Machu. The wise old advisor Levercam looked out and saw him. She saw the rage in his eyes, the tension in his body, and she ran to King Concobar in terror. "A warrior comes towards us in a boat," she cried, "and a terrible fury is upon him. If he is not met with care, all the young men of Emain Machu will be slain by his hand this day." The men of Ulster were alarmed. They knew of his power, but they had not yet witnessed its full, uncontrolled fury. Concobar and his advisors knew they had to find a way to quell this internal storm, lest their greatest champion turn his destructive power upon his own people in a blind rage. It was Concobar who devised a desperate, unorthodox, and brilliant plan. He commanded the women of Emain Machu of Themto go out to meet Chulainn, and he commanded them to go bare-breasted, to expose their nakedness to the approaching warrior. As Chulainn brought his boat to shore and leaped onto the land, his body already beginning to twist with the first signs of the Ryostrad, he was met with this shocking sight. A procession of the noble women of his court, the wives and mothers of his comrades, standing before him, their chests bared. The young warrior, for all his fury, was still a man of honor, raised in a strict warrior code. The sight of the women's nakedness filled him with an overwhelming sense of shame and respect. He immediately averted his gaze, burying his face in the side of his chariot. That was the moment they were waiting for. In that instant of distraction, the strongest warriors of Ulster, who had been hiding in wait, surged forward. They seized the hero, his guard momentarily down, and lifted him bodily. They carried him to the first of 3 immense vats of ice-cold water they had prepared. They plunged him into it. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The sheer heat radiating from Chulainn's rage-filled body made the freezing water boil over in a furious torrent. The iron bands holding the wooden staves of the great vat burst apart under the pressure, and the vat exploded. Undeterred, the warriors lifted him from the wreckage and plunged him into the second vat. This one did not burst, but the water within it hissed and steamed so violently that a man could not bear to put his hand near it, bubbling and seething as if a great fire had been lit beneath it. Finally, they moved him to the third and final vat. This time the water was only heated to a pleasant, temperate warmth. The monstrous transformation receded. The twisted limbs returned to their proper places. The bulging eye sank back into its socket. The hero light faded. The rage was cooled. Chulainn stepped out of the water, no longer a monster, but a man once more, his face now blushing with a deep red of embarrassment. The women brought him his clothes, and he was led back into Emain Machu, calm and composed. This dramatic event reveals the fundamental conflict at the very core of Chulainn's being. He was the sworn protector of Ulster, a hero driven by a profound loyalty and an unshakable sense of honor. Yet, coiled within him was a monstrous, chaotic power that perpetually threatened to destroy everything and everyone he held dear. His entire life became a constant, precarious balancing act, a desperate struggle between the hero and the monster, the protector and the destroyer. The Ryostrad was the source of his glory on the battlefield, but it was also the deep, dark wellspring of his greatest tragedies, turning his divine strength into a curse that would ultimately consume him and those he loved. It was the physical manifestation of a destiny that was both glorious and doomed. The hero had been forged. The monster within him had been revealed. Chulainn now stood as Ulster's champion, a man whose power was as terrifying as it was protective. The stage was now set for the great epic of Irish mythology, the central saga around which all other tales of the Ulster cycle revolve. This was the Táin Bua Cailmhdeath cattle raid of Chulainn, and like many great and terrible wars, it was sparked not by a quest for land or power, but by a simple argument born of pride and envy. The story begins in the royal tent of Cruachan, the seat of power in the kingdom of Connacht. There Queen Medb, a formidable warrior queen, fierce and proud, lay beside her husband, King Ailill Mac Mata. In the quiet of the night they began to speak, comparing their fortunes and possessions. This was no idle chat, it was a contest of status. They counted their jewels, their lands, their fortresses, and their herds. For every possession Medb named, Ailill could name one of equal value. They were perfectly matched in wealth and power in every respect save one. At the very end of the accounting, it was discovered that Ailill owned a single magnificent white-horned bull named Finnbennach, the White-Horned. This bull had been born into Medb's own herds, but deeming it undignified to be owned by a woman, he had wandered over and joined Ailill's cattle. Medb, a queen who defined herself by her power and sovereignty, had nothing to match him. To her, this was not a minor discrepancy. It was an intolerable stain upon her honor. Consumed by jealousy and a burning need to be her husband's equal in all things, Medb consulted her chief messengers. She asked if there existed anywhere in the 5 provinces of Ireland a bull magnificent enough to rival Finnbennach. Her messengers told her of the one beast in all the land who was not just an equal, but a superior, the legendary Don Cailmhde, the brown bull of Cooley, who resided in the kingdom of Ulster. Determined to possess him, Medb first attempted diplomacy. She dispatched messengers to the bull's owner, a wealthy and proud Ulster chieftain named Dair Mac Fiachna. Her offer was generous. Dair could lend her the bull for 1 year. In return, he would receive 50 prime heifers, a great expanse of land in Connacht equal to his own, a chariot worth a fortune, and the intimate friendship of Queen Medb herself. Dair, overwhelmed by such a lavish proposal, readily agreed. A great feast was held to celebrate the deal. But pride and drink are a potent and ruinous combination. During the feast, Medb's messengers, deep in their cups, began to boast loudly. "Is it not a generous thing that Dair has done for us?" one said. "It is," said another, "but it is more generous of our Queen Medb. For if Dair had not given the bull willingly, she would have taken it from him by force." A servant of Dair's overheard this drunken boast and, outraged, reported it to his master. Dair flew into a furious rage. The insult was unbearable. To have his generosity framed as a submission to a threat was a slight he could not endure. He stormed into the hall where the messengers were sleeping, roused them, and declared the deal void. "By the gods my people swear by," he bellowed, "unless I am taken by force, you will not have the Don Cailmhde." He sent the messengers packing, empty-handed and humiliated. When they returned to Cruachan and told Medb of Dair's refusal, her rage was boundless. Her offer had been scorned, her power challenged. She swore a mighty oath that she would have the bull, and if that meant laying waste to the entire province of Ulster, then so be it. She began to assemble one of the largest armies Ireland had ever seen, gathering the forces not only of her own kingdom of Connacht, but calling on her allies in Leinster and Munster as well. The armies of 3 of the 4 provinces of Ireland were now massed against the one isolated kingdom of Ulster. For the invaders there was just one problem, and for Ulster one saving grace. Ages before, The men of Ulster had grievously wronged the goddess Machu. Pregnant and on the verge of giving birth, she had been brought before the then king of Ulster, who in his arrogance, boasted that his horses could run faster than any woman. He forced Machu to race against his prized chariot team. She pleaded with him, explaining that her time was near, but the cruel king would not relent. Calling upon her divine strength, Machu ran the race and crossed the finish line just ahead of the horses. As she did, she collapsed and gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. And with her dying breath, she screamed out a terrible curse upon the men of Ulster. In their hour of greatest need, for 9 generations, they would be struck down by the pains of childbirth, leaving them as helpless as she had been. The curse was known as the Ses Noindin, the 9-day sickness of the Ulaid. And so, just as Medb's vast army crossed the border into Ulster, the curse fell. In every fort and homestead, every man of fighting age was laid low, struck down by debilitating pangs, helpless and writhing in agony. The entire kingdom was defenseless. All except one. For reasons lost to the mists of time, perhaps his divine heritage rendered him immune, perhaps his youth protected him. The 17-year-old Chulainn was untouched by the curse. And so the defense of an entire kingdom, the fate of all of Ulster, fell upon the shoulders of a single youth. What followed was a masterclass in heroic defiance. Chulainn could not hope to face the entire army at once. Instead, he became a phantom, a deadly shadow haunting the invaders' advance. He used the rugged landscape of Ulster to his advantage, striking from the forests and the mists, waging a relentless campaign of guerrilla warfare. He would leave cryptic messages carved in agam on standing stones, challenging the army not to advance until one of their champions could replicate his feat of cutting the stone. He picked off their scouts and foragers, sowing chaos and fear. Most importantly, he invoked the ancient and sacred right of single combat at a river ford. By the laws of honor that governed heroic warfare, an army could not cross a ford if a single champion stood there and offered a challenge. Medb, bound by this code and seeing it as a way to dispose of this lone obstacle with minimal losses, agreed. She began to send her champions one by one to face him. For months, the great army of Ireland was held at a standstill at the ford by a single teenager. Day after day, a new hero, confident in his skill, would be sent to face the Hound of Ulster. And day after day, that hero would fall, his body left in the blood-stained water as a warning to the next. Chulainn was a whirlwind of death, a solitary bulwark against an overwhelming tide. He was wounded, exhausted, fighting on pure willpower and the fire of his divine stamina. Medb and Ailill grew desperate and furious. They broke the rules of single combat, sending warriors in pairs, then in dozens. But each time, Chulainn would be seized by the Ryostrad. He would warp into his monstrous battle form and slaughter them all, building walls from their corpses. The strain was immense. At one point, grievously wounded and near death from exhaustion, he was visited by his divine father, the god Lugh. Lugh sang him to sleep with a magical lullaby and, for 3 days and 3 nights, tended to his wounds, healing him with supernatural herbs. But while the champion slept, the war did not. The boy troop of Amain Machu, Chulainn's childhood friends and comrades, could not bear to stand idle while he fought alone. 3 times 50 strong, they marched to the ford and took his place. They fought with the heart of Ulster, but they were only boys. They were slaughtered to the last child by Medb's veteran army. Chulainn awoke, his body healed but his spirit about to be broken. When he saw the field littered with the small bodies of his friends, his grief turned into a terrible, cold, and silent rage. This was not the hot fury of the Ryostrad. It was something deeper, more horrifying. He unleashed a slaughter upon the Connaught forces that was even more horrific than what had come before, exacting a terrible vengeance for the death of his comrades. The army of Ireland was stalled, shattered against this one unyielding warrior. Medb, ever the strategist, finally understood. Brute force was failing. This boy could not be defeated by swords or spears alone. She needed to break not just his body but his spirit. She needed a weapon that could strike at his heart. And to do that, she would summon the one man in all of Ireland who was Chulainn's equal, the one man whose loyalty he trusted above all others, the one man whose appearance on the far side of the ford would tear the hero's soul in two. His foster brother, his sworn companion, his dearest friend Ferdiad. The duel between Chulainn and Ferdiad stands as one of the most heartbreaking episodes in all of world mythology. It is a story of love, betrayal, and the devastating cost of a warrior's honor. In her tent, Queen Medb saw her grand invasion stalling, her finest champions dead in the bloody water of the ford, all at the hands of one boy. She knew that to break this impasse, she needed a warrior who could not just match Chulainn's skill, but one who could break his spirit. Her gaze fell upon Ferdiad mac Domain, the mighty prince from Connacht. Ferdiad was Chulainn's equal. They had trained side by side in the Fortress of Shadows under the warrior woman Scathach, learning the very same feats, their skills a perfect mirror image of one another. Ferdiad even possessed a unique advantage, a skin of tough, impenetrable horn that no ordinary weapon could pierce. But more than that, he was Chulainn's sworn foster brother, the friend he loved above all others. When Medb first summoned Ferdiad and commanded him to fight Chulainn, he refused, horrified. "By the gods," he declared, "it is a misguided thing you ask of me. We swore oaths of brotherhood. We shared a bed, a teacher, a shield. I will not betray my friend for any prize." But Medb was cunning and relentless. When honor failed to move him, she resorted to psychological warfare. She plied him with wine, seating him at her own right hand, treating him like a king. She sent her beautiful daughter, Findabair, to sit with him to pour his wine, and to promise him her hand in marriage, a promise she made to nearly every champion she sent to their death. When he was softened by drink and desire, she unleashed her cruelest weapon, shame. Her bards and satirists began to mock him, questioning his courage. Medb herself taunted him. "Is it true what they say, Ferdiad?" she sneered. "That you live in the shadow of this Ulster boy? I have heard Chulainn himself speak of you. He said that while your skill was great in training, he always feared your heart would fail when faced with true battle. He believes you are afraid to face him." This was a lie, a poisoned dart aimed directly at Ferdiad's warrior pride. Goaded by the relentless insults, his honor pricked raw, his judgment clouded by wine and the tempting whispers of Findabair, Ferdiad's resolve finally crumbled. In a tragic moment of weakness, he agreed. He would fight. The next morning, as Ferdiad armed himself and rode his chariot towards the ford, a terrible premonition seized him. A darkness fell over his spirit. But he was now bound by his foolish promise and his wounded pride. He could not turn back. When Chulainn, standing guard at his post, saw the magnificent chariot of Ferdiad approaching, his heart sank. He knew at once why his friend had come. He called out across the water, his voice filled with anguish, pleading with his brother. "Ferdiad, what cause brings you here to fight me? You should not have listened to the lies of that woman. Turn back, my brother." He reminded him of their shared past, their days of youth and training in the land of Alba. "We were heart companions," Chulainn cried, his voice breaking. "We were comrades in the woods. We were fellows in the fortress, sleeping in the same bed after our days of training. We swore an oath, you and I, that we would never raise our weapons against each other. It is a grief that I should ever see your death." Ferdiad's heart ached to hear these words, but he felt he had gone too far. "Chulainn," he called back, his voice strained. "Our friendship is now a memory. I have given my word. Promise has been made. We must fight." And so, with the heaviest of hearts, the two greatest warriors of their generation began their fight to the death. For 3 full days the battle raged. It was a spectacle of supreme martial skill, a beautiful and terrible dance of death. They fought with swords, with spears, with massive shields and sharp javelins. They used every feat of arms they had learned together in the Fortress of Shadows, each anticipating the other's moves. Their skills so perfectly matched that neither could gain an advantage. And at the end of each grueling day, a remarkable thing would happen. They would lay down their bloody weapons, walk to the center of the ford, and embrace, kissing each other 3 times in the manner of brothers. Their horses shared the same paddock. Their loyal charioteers shared the same fire. Chulainn, whose people had access to magical healing, would send half of the potent herbs and balms applied to his own grievous wounds across the water to Ferdiad, and Ferdiad, whose camp was supplied by Medb's army, would share his food and fine drink in return. It was a battle between 2 men who loved each other, forced into a conflict neither truly wanted. But on the morning of the 4th day the mood had changed. The nightly truce was over. They met at the ford in grim silence. They knew this would be the final day. Ferdiad, using his superior physical strength and protected by his horned skin, began to gain the upper hand. He battered Chulainn, wounding him time and again, driving him back into the bloody water. Chulainn was weakening, his body covered in 100 cuts, his spirit flagging under the assault of his dearest friend. Beaten, bloodied, and facing defeat, Chulainn heard Ferdiad's cry of triumph. In that moment of absolute desperation, the curse of his power began to stir. The heat rose in him. He knew what he had to do. The monstrous transformation of the Ryastrad began to contort his body. His friend was no longer his friend. He was an enemy who had to be destroyed. He called out in a changed, guttural voice to his loyal charioteer Leg. Leg! Throw me the Gibalga! Leg's face went pale. He knew what this meant. He floated the terrible weapon down the stream. Chulainn caught it between the toes of his foot. Ferdiad saw him preparing for a final cast and raised his great shield, expecting a normal spear to his chest. But Chulainn fainted high, and as Ferdiad's shield went up, Chulainn kicked upwards, unleashing the Gibalga. It shot through the water and struck Ferdiad from below, piercing his soft underbelly, the one place his horned skin did not protect him. The barbed spear tore through his body, its 30 hooks unfurling internally, shredding his organs and sealing his doom. Ferdiad dropped his shield. A look of shock and agony crossed his face. "That is enough," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "I die by that." The Ryastrad receded from Chulainn as quickly as it had come, the monstrous rage replaced by a wave of cold, soul-shattering horror. He rushed forward as Ferdiad fell, catching him in his arms. He carried his dying friend across the ford and laid him gently on the northern, Ulster side of the river, so that he would not die on the side of his enemies. He held Ferdiad in his arms, his own body racked with wounds and a grief so profound it shook him to his core. The victory was hollow, a ghastly wound on his soul that would never heal. He had saved Ulster for another day, but in doing so, he had been forced by his rage and his duty to destroy a part of himself. "Ah, Ferdiad!" He wept over the body, his lament echoing across the silent battlefield. "Betrayed to death. Our last meeting, oh how sad! All was play, all was sport until you came to the ford. You to die, I to remain. Ever sad our long farewell." The curse of his power had claimed its most personal victim yet. He had won the battle, but he had lost his brother. The death of Ferdiad marked a turning point. Shortly after that tragic duel, the men of Ulster, finally roused from their cursed 9-day slumber, rose up as a furious host. They joined their champion, and together they fell upon the depleted armies of Connacht, routing them completely and sending them fleeing back across the border. The great cattle raid of Cooley was over. Ulster was saved. But for Chulainn the victory was ashes in his mouth. The cheers in Emain Machu sounded hollow. The glory forever tainted by the memory of his foster brother's dying breath in his arms. Years passed. He remained the celebrated champion of his people, a living legend. But a shadow had fallen upon his spirit, a grief that never truly lifted. And fate, it seemed, was not yet finished with its cruelties. The hero's rage had saved his people, but his warrior's pride would soon bring a tragedy directly to his own door, in the most devastating way imaginable. On a clear day, the men guarding the coast of Ulster saw a sight. A small boat approached the shore, and in it stood a single youth. He was perhaps no more than 7 or 8 years of age, yet he carried himself with an insolent grace. He held a small bronze shield and a toy spear, and he performed incredible feats, casting his spear high and catching it before it fell, all while guiding his craft to shore. The chieftain of that stretch of coast, seeing this unknown arrival, went down to challenge him, demanding that he not land until he identified himself. The boy laughed. He replied that he was not accustomed to turning aside or giving his name upon request. Provoked by this arrogance, the chieftain attacked. The boy, with preternatural skill, disarmed the chieftain with a single precise cast of a stone from his sling. Word of this astonishing youth spread like fire. Warrior after warrior went to challenge him, and each was defeated with humiliating ease. Even the great Conall Cernach, second only to Chulainn among Ulster's heroes, was bested by the boy's uncanny skill and sent away shamed. The news reached Emain Macha, creating a state of alarm. Who was this invincible child who could defeat their greatest champions and refuse the customs of their land? It was Chulainn's wife Emer who understood first. A terrible premonition seized her. "Do not go down to the shore, my husband," she pleaded with Chulainn. "It is the son of Ave. I have dreamt of this. He comes seeking you. Do not meet him in anger." But Chulainn was bound by his duty. As the champion of Ulster, it was his sacred obligation to face any challenger who threatened the peace and refused to give their name. "Woman's counsel is not a warrior's path," he said, shaking off her warning. "If he were the son of the king of the world, I would face him to defend the honor of Ulster." He took up his weapons and strode down to the beach. He saw the boy standing proudly by the surf, a perfect image of youthful strength and confidence. A strange feeling stirred in Chulainn's heart, a flicker of recognition he could not place. He saw his own defiance in the boy's eyes. "Who are you, boy?" Chulainn demanded, his voice echoing over the waves. "Give me your name and your lineage, or you will not leave this shore alive." The boy looked at the great hero without fear. "If I were not who I am," he replied boldly, "I might be afraid of those words. But I am bound by my charge. I will not turn aside for any man, and I will not give my name to a single challenger." The words struck Chulainn like a physical blow. They were a twisted echo of the very instructions he himself had given to Aif so many years ago. But his pride, his warrior's code, would not allow him to see the truth. He saw only an arrogant intruder who mocked the laws of Ulster. "Then you have chosen death, boy," Chulainn said, his voice grim. They fought. And to Chulainn's utter astonishment, the boy was his equal. He parried every blow, dodged every thrust, and matched every feat of arms Chulainn knew. The champion of Ulster, the man who had held off an army, was being fought to a standstill by a mere child. The battle moved from the sand into the shallow water of the surf. The boy was so skilled, he even managed to use his sword to cut a lock of Chulainn's hair, a mark of deep humiliation for a warrior. Frustration mounted in Chulainn, and with it, his infamous rage began to build. To be bested, to be shamed by this nameless youth, it was unthinkable. Pushed to the brink, his honor wounded and his fury rising, he was once again driven to the desperate edge where his deadliest weapon waited. He turned his back for a moment and called out to the waves, preparing himself. He would use the gibalga. As they grappled in the surf, he thrust the barbed spear into the boy's body. The youth cried out in pain and shock. His strength failed him, and he collapsed into Chulainn's arms. The fight was over. As the life began to fade from the boy's eyes, he looked up at the hero who had killed him. "This Scathach never taught you this," the boy whispered, his voice failing. "My father. He is the only one. He." And only then, as the boy's hand fell limply from his own side, did Chulainn see it. The glint of gold on the boy's finger. It was the ring. The very same ring he had given to Aif, now fitting perfectly on the finger of his dying son. The horrifying truth crashed down upon him with the force of a tidal wave. A coldness spread through his veins that no battle fury could warm. The boy was Chulainn, his son, his only son. He had followed his father's instructions to the letter, and for that loyalty, his father had killed him. He lifted the small limp body from the water. The warriors of Ulster, who had been watching in stunned silence from the cliffs, saw their champion walking towards them, his face a mask of unimaginable agony, carrying the child he had just slain. "Here is my son, men of Ulster," he cried out, his voice choked with a grief so profound it seemed to cleave the very air. "My only son. And I, his father, have killed him." His rage, the very force that had made him a hero, had now made him a kinslayer, the destroyer of his own future, the murderer of his own blood. The warrior's code, the foolish pride that had compelled him to issue that fateful command years ago, had returned to him in the form of this perfect, terrible tragedy. He had fought armies, monsters, and demigods. But in the end, his own nature, his own curse, had dealt him the most grievous wound of all, one from which his spirit would never, ever recover. The shadow of Conla's death never left Chulainn. He had slain his own legacy, and the light in his spirit, once as bright and fiery as his father the sun god, was now dimmed by a permanent, inconsolable grief. He continued his duties as the champion of Ulster, but he was a changed man, a hero haunted by the ghosts of his own making, the ghost of his dearest friend and the ghost of his only son. But his enemies, those who had nursed their hatred for years, saw this not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. They would not allow him the peace of his sorrow. Queen Medb of Connaught had never forgiven him for the profound humiliation of the Táin. Her pride still stung from the defeat inflicted by a single youth. More dangerous still were the children of the men Chulainn had slain. Lugaid, son of the great Munster king Roy, Uck, son of the king of Tara, Cairbre Nia Fair, and the 6 sons of the sorcerer Chulainn. All of them were now grown men, their hearts consumed by a singular, burning desire for vengeance. They formed a dark alliance, their hatred a poison that spread through the courts of Ireland, weaving a web of dark magic and deceit designed for one purpose: to lure the Hound of Ulster to his final battle. Their plan was one of insidious genius. They knew that to face a full-strength Chulainn, even with their combined armies, was to court disaster. They had to unravel him first. They had to strip away the magical protections and the very luck that shielded him. They would achieve this by forcing him to break his Gisa. Every great Irish hero was bound by Gisa sacred, personal taboos or prohibitions that they must never, under any circumstances, violate. A Gise was not a mere superstition. It was a mystical contract with fate. To honor one's Gisa was to maintain spiritual power and good fortune. To break a Gise was to unravel one's own destiny, to invite misfortune and doom, and to leave oneself spiritually naked and vulnerable to enemies. Chulainn, as a great hero, was bound by several powerful Gisa. Among the most important were 2 that his enemies now conspired to turn against him. The first was that he must never eat the flesh of a dog. The dog was his namesake animal, his totem, and to consume its flesh would be a profound act of self-violation. The second Gise was that he must never refuse an offering of hospitality when on a journey, for to do so was an act of great dishonor. His enemies devised a plan that would place these 2 sacred vows in direct, unbreakable conflict. The conspirators gathered their forces and marched towards the plains of Muir Themne. Chulainn's own lands. But to draw him out from the safety of Emain Machu, they used sorcery. The children of Chulainn conjured phantom armies, creating the illusion of a massive invasion. The air filled with the sounds of clashing shields, the screams of dying men, and the thunder of chariots, a magical lure the warhound of Ulster could not possibly ignore. At Emain Machu, those who loved him sensed the dark magic at play. The great druid Cathbad, his own grandfather, looked into the future and saw his grandson's death. He pleaded with him not to go. His wife Emer, her heart breaking with premonition, clung to him, leading the women of the court in a great lamentation that echoed through the stone halls, for they knew he would not return. "If you go," Emer cried, "you will not come back to me. Leave this phantom battle to another. Stay and guard your own life." But the call of battle, real or imagined, was too strong. His honor, his duty as Ulster's shield, his very nature, compelled him to answer. He gently set his wife aside, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Fame outlives life," he told her. "I will not shame my name by hiding while my lands are attacked." As he prepared his chariot, the omens of his doom were everywhere. When his loyal charioteer Leg went to fetch his great horse, the Liath Machu, the magnificent beast refused to be yoked, weeping tears of blood. Only when Chulainn himself came and rebuked the horse for its disloyalty did it finally relent and allow itself to be harnessed. He set off, his heart heavy but his purpose firm. On the road leading out from Emain Machu, he came upon the trap. By the side of the road sat 3 ancient crones, hideously ugly, each with only one eye. They were roasting a dog, his namesake animal, on a spit made of rowan wood, a tree with powerful magical associations. These were the daughters of Chulainn, cloaked in illusion, or perhaps manifestations of the Morrigan herself, the triple goddess of war and fate, come to claim her due. As his chariot approached, they called out to him in cracked, reedy voices. "Join us for a moment, great Chulainn. Share our humble meal before you ride to battle." Chulainn knew instantly he was trapped. A cold dread washed over him. Before him was an impossible choice, a perfect snare of fate. If he accepted their offer, he would break his most personal guise and eat the flesh of the hound. If he refused, he would be spurning hospitality, a grave dishonor that would also break a sacred guise. Hoping to mitigate the violation, he chose what he believed to be the lesser of 2 evils. He would not refuse the hospitality of old women on the road. He dismounted, took a piece of the roasted meat they offered, and ate it. The moment the flesh touched his lips, he felt a profound weakness overcome him. A wave of nausea and fatigue washed through his body. The hand that took the meat, and the thigh on the same side of his body, were struck with a sudden paralysis, losing all their strength. His spiritual armor had been shattered. His luck was broken. He was now vulnerable, a partially crippled demigod facing an army fueled by hatred and dark magic. He continued on his journey, arriving at the plain to find his enemies waiting, their ranks arrayed against him. They jeered as they saw him approach, sensing his weakness. Lugaid Mac Conroy stepped forward, holding 3 long grey spears. They had been specially forged for this day. A druid had prophesied that a king would fall by each one of them. The final tragic battle began. Chulainn, though weakened and partially paralyzed, fought with the heart of a cornered lion. He urged Leg to drive his chariot into the enemy ranks, and he fought with a desperate fury, a pale shadow of the Ryastrad's glory, but still terrible to behold. Lugaid cast the first of the magical spears. "They say a king will fall by this," he cried. The spear flew wide of Chulainn, but it struck his beloved charioteer, Leg Mac Riangabra, piercing him through. Leg was the king of all charioteers, the greatest to ever hold the reins. As he fell, he gasped, "I have been struck." Chulainn, his heart breaking, pulled the spear from his friend's body and fought on alone. Lugaid then cast the second magical spear. "A king will fall by this as well," he taunted. Again the spear missed Chulainn, but it struck his magnificent gray horse, Liath Machu, the king of all horses. The great beast collapsed, mortally wounded, its side torn open. It struggled to its feet and fled, leaving Chulainn to fight from a chariot drawn by only a single horse. Now standing alone, his best friend dead, his godlike horse dying, his own body weakened and broken by his shattered Gisa, Chulainn faced his end. His enemies closed in around him. Uk, son of Cairbre, urged Lugaid on. "Finish him, Lugaid. For my father who he killed, and for yours." Lugaid took the third and final spear. "And they say a king will fall by this one too," he roared. "And the king they meant was you, Chulainn, the king of all Ireland's heroes." He hurled the spear with all his might. This time it struck true. It pierced Chulainn's side with such force that it passed clean through his body, spilling his entrails out onto the floor of his chariot. The great hero was mortally wounded. The king-slaying spear had struck its final target. The king of Ireland's heroes was mortally wounded, his lifeblood spilling onto the floor of his chariot, his divine strength finally failing him. For any other man, this would have been the end of final gasping breath on a bloody battlefield. But the Hound of Ulster would not die lying down. He would not give his enemies the satisfaction of seeing him fall. Even in his final moments, his indomitable warrior spirit, his unwavering pride, refused to yield. With his remaining strength, he clutched his own spilling entrails, holding them to his body, and stumbled from his chariot. He saw, a short distance away, a great pillar stone, a gallant standing stark and gray against the sky. He would die on his feet, facing his foes, a warrior to the very last breath. He dragged himself across the blood-soaked grass, each step in agony, his vision blurring. He reached the cold granite of the standing stone and leaned against it. He then took off his golden breast girdle and with his one good hand, painstakingly looped it around the stone and his own torso, tying himself firmly to it. He cinched the knot tight, ensuring that even when death finally claimed him, his body would remain upright, a defiant statue of Ulster's might. He gripped the hilt of his sword, raised his head, and fixed his gaze upon the army of his enemies. A profound and eerie silence fell over the battlefield. His enemies, who had been surging forward for the kill, stopped dead in their tracks. They stared at the lone figure bound to the stone, his head still crowned by the faint, flickering embers of the lawn lathe, the hero light. They were terrified. They could not believe that any man could endure such a wound and remain standing. They were convinced this was another trick, that if they approached, he would lash out with one final impossible burst of fury and slay dozens more. The awe and fear he had inspired throughout his short, violent life held them paralyzed. For a time that seemed to stretch into eternity, the army waited, watching the silent figure. The only movement was that of the great warhorse, the Liath Machu. Despite his own mortal wound, the horse had returned to his master's side. He circled the standing stone, letting out great sorrowful cries that echoed across the plain. He nudged his master's limp hand with his head and then, turning to face the enemy army, he made his own final stand, driving back any who dared to come near with vicious bites and powerful kicks from his hooves, a last desperate defense of the hero he had served so loyally. The sun climbed the sky and began to descend. Still Chulainn stood, his unseeing eyes fixed on his foes. They did not know if he was alive or dead. Finally, a sign came that the Great Spirit had passed. A large dark bird, a scald crow, a form often taken by the Morrigan, the goddess of battle and death, flew down from the sky. It circled the stone 3 times and then, seeing no movement, perched upon Chulainn's shoulder, a dark omen confirming that fate had claimed its due. Only then did his enemies truly believe that Chulainn, The Hound of Ulster, the demigod warrior, was dead. Lugaid mac Conroy, emboldened by the sign, stepped forward to claim the ultimate trophy. To be the man who took the head of Chulainn would grant him eternal fame. He approached the silent figure and, to show his dominance, took Chulainn's own sword from his lifeless grip to deliver the final severing blow. But as Lugaid raised the blade, the dead hero's arm, through a final spasm of nerve and spirit, swung down with incredible force. The heavy sword fell from Chulainn's hand, its sharpened edge striking Lugaid's arm and severing his hand at the wrist. Even in death, the hound had struck back. Enraged and in agony, Lugaid nonetheless cut off the hero's head. And as he did, the hero light finally faded to darkness, and a great cry of triumph and grief rose from the opposing armies. So ended the life of Chulainn, a life of blazing, unparalleled glory, bought at the price of unbearable sorrow. His story is the ultimate tragedy of the warrior hero. His rage, his Ryostrad, was the very thing that allowed him to defend his people against impossible odds. It was the source of his legend. Yet, that same uncontrollable force led him to kill his best friend and his only son. It bound him to a path of violence that could only end in his own destruction. He was a hero cursed by his own greatness, a man whose strength was inseparable from his sorrow. He chose a short life of fame over a long life of peace, and in the end, fate gave him exactly what he asked for, in all its terrible, magnificent, and heartbreaking glory. He remains forever tied to that stone, a symbol of defiance, a testament to the tragic cost of being a hero. The tale of Chulainn is a cornerstone of Irish mythology, a story that explores the very nature of heroism, fate, and the destructive potential that can lie within even the noblest of hearts. He is a figure of immense complexity, a loving husband, a loyal friend, a devoted protector, and a monstrous engine of chaos. His legacy is not just one of victory, but of profound loss, a timeless reminder that the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of Celtic legend here at the Eldritch Codex. If you found yourself captivated by the tragic tale of the Hound of Ulster, please consider subscribing to our channel and striking the bell icon to be notified of our future explorations into the myths and monsters that haunt our history. We invite you to share your thoughts on Chulainn in the comments below. Was he a true hero, a tragic victim of fate, or a monster of his own making? Until next time, keep seeking the stories that lie hidden in the shadows of our past.